My life flowed in harmony and tranquility for a long time. I had a stable job that provided not only material security but also an inner sense of confidence in the future. I was used to a routine where financial matters didn't cause much anxiety. However, one day, everything changed. On an ordinary day, I received a call from the company managing my credit cards. They reported a suspicious transaction for $50,000. Hearing this, it felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. Shock and confusion overwhelmed me. Yet, even in a state of complete panic, I quickly pulled myself together and started taking the necessary steps to stop the funds from being withdrawn. Shortly after that, my husband, Paul, began calling me incessantly. At the time, he was abroad on business, and we had to work together to sort out the confusion. This situation only underscored how important it is to maintain control over financial flows in life. My name is Alexis, and I'm 27 years old. I've already climbed the career ladder and hold a managerial position. My professional journey began back in college, where I met Paul, my husband. We're the same age, and this year marks our third wedding anniversary. Among my acquaintances, many women chose to leave their jobs after marriage and devote themselves to the home. However, I've always felt that I had strong reasons not to follow this trend. For me, work is not just a source of income but also an important part of my identity, a space where I feel confident and free. In our family, I am the primary breadwinner, earning more than my husband. This fact isn't openly discussed, but it always lingers in the background of our relationship, making me sometimes reflect on how it affects both of us. I often think about our financial stability. Frankly speaking, I'm concerned that if we relied solely on Paul's income, we wouldn't be able to secure the future we dream of. It's clear that Paul shares these concerns, although we rarely talk about them directly. Financial independence is one of the pillars on which our relationship rests. We decided to keep our finances separate and split all household expenses equally. This approach allows me to maintain control over my personal funds, which brings me a sense of autonomy and satisfaction. Despite this, there are times when I feel the need to reassess our expenses. One such moment was when I accidentally discovered a charge for a subscription while riding the train home. This situation reminded me that I should more carefully evaluate the necessity of certain financial commitments. I started thinking about my current subscriptions and whether they were truly justified. However, like many working people, these thoughts are often pushed aside due to a lack of time and energy. When I entered the living room, a wave of irritation hit me as soon as I crossed the threshold. Socks were scattered all over the floor as if they were part of the decor, and empty cans stood on the coffee table like silent witnesses to carelessness. A hoodie lay tossed on the couch, next to a phone, abandoned as if in a hurry, though there was no reason to rush. All this was an obvious trace of my husband, who had an incredible ability to leave chaos in his wake as soon as he stepped into the house. It seemed that every time he returned from work, he dissolved into his thoughts, while his belongings, unnoticed by him, turned the house into a realm of disorder. I couldn't hold back a frustrated comment. The socks, the cans, the scattered items, they all stirred up a wave of resentment in me. As usual, my husband brushed off my words, calmly replying that cleaning it all up would take seconds, and I could easily do it myself if I got home earlier. It sounded as though maintaining order was solely my responsibility, and any help from him was just a courtesy. I couldn't resist asking why he couldn't take on at least some of the household chores or make dinner. But his response was full of complaints. He was tired, didn't have time, and had to settle for store-bought food. I wanted to argue that I was no less exhausted, but instead, I pointed out the obvious. If he wasn't going to help with the housework, he could at least focus more on his job. He didn't take my words seriously. I saw a flicker of irritation cross his face, but he remained indifferent, merely brushing me off like it was something insignificant. Soon, he left the living room, completely absorbed in his phone, without even giving me a glance. I felt the unfairness of the situation, realizing that the bulk of the household responsibilities fell on my shoulders, even though we both worked full-time. But at the same time, deep down, I started to doubt myself. Was I being too strict? Was I wrong to make these demands? What if he started acting even more dismissive, trying to prove something to me or to himself? However, to my surprise, my words seemed to have an effect. Suddenly, he started coming home late, excusing it with overtime work. At first, it seemed suspicious, but gradually, I began to believe that he was genuinely trying to change. My joy at this was so great that I started putting more effort into the household, thinking that by doing so, I was supporting him since he was clearly overworked. One day, I came home early and decided to tidy up his room, which hadn't seen a proper cleaning in quite some time. As I expected, the room was its usual mess. Empty cans and bottles were scattered everywhere. I was sweeping them into a trash bag when I noticed something unusual on the bed. It was a gift box, partially hidden under a pillow. At first, I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but after shining a light on the mysterious object, I realized it was a handbag from my favorite brand, beautifully packaged and neatly tucked away. In that moment, it hit me. Could this be a surprise for my upcoming birthday? It was just a week away, and finding this filled me with joyful anticipation. Despite my excitement, I decided not to reveal that I had discovered it. I carefully placed the bag back, assuming that my husband was planning to give it to me on what was supposed to be a special day for both of us. However, when my birthday came, there was no mention of the gift. When my husband unexpectedly announced that he was leaving for a business trip abroad the following week, it caught me off guard. His job had never required travel, let alone international trips, and such news was unprecedented for us. He explained that it was due to his recent successes at work, but something inside me tightened. Under normal circumstances, would have supported him and even been happy for such an opportunity, but in light of recent events, the unexplained birthday gift that was never given and his indifferent attitude toward my special day, doubts began to creep in. On the morning of his supposed departure, I watched as he packed his things and said goodbye to me. I felt a strange heaviness in my heart. After he left, my anxiety only grew. Unable to shake off my unease, I decided to continue my little investigation. An inner voice told me that things weren't as simple as they seemed. I took the risk of going back to his room, which I had avoided since discovering the hidden gift. My heart pounded as if it sensed something important when I bent down to look under the bed where the bag had been. But it was gone. Its absence confirmed my suspicion that the business trip wasn't as innocent as it appeared. My mind plunged into a swirling mess of guesses and worries, and the commute to work felt endlessly slow and heavy. The same questions echoed in my head. What was he hiding? Why had he lied to me? These doubts and fears consumed me, and I couldn't focus at work. My colleagues began to notice my state, and Ed, one of them, approached to ask if everything was all right. I barely resisted the urge to share all the turmoil inside me, but at that moment, my phone vibrated. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Normally, I ignore such calls, But this time, in my heightened state of anxiety, I decided to answer. Maybe it was intuition, or perhaps just a desperate need for some information that would shed light on what was happening. I stepped into the hallway and pressed the accept button. On the other end of the line was the company that issued my credit cards. My heart began to race again. It seemed that everything came down to money and secrets. The operator quickly explained the reason for the call. Over the past few days, more than $20,000 had been spent from my account, bringing the total expenses to $50,000. I felt a wave of panic wash over me, and my mind refused to accept what was happening. This couldn't be real. I rushed back to my desk to check my wallet, but when I opened my bag, I was horrified to realize it wasn't there. The credit card, which had always been with me, was missing. Struggling to control my rising panic, I returned to the phone and asked the operator to stop all transactions immediately. Fortunately, the operation was still in progress, and it could be halted. This brought me a tiny bit of relief, but I knew this was far from the end of the story. I reported that my card was missing and asked them to consider it stolen. The operator agreed and promised to initiate the blocking process right away. Even after the call ended, I couldn't calm down. My heart raced with anxiety. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well, explaining that my credit card had likely been stolen and used without my knowledge. I asked for permission to leave early to sort everything out. My colleagues and boss, noticing my state, expressed concern and let me go without asking too many questions. Rushing to catch the train, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gnawed at me from the inside. My phone kept vibrating in my bag. My husband was calling me repeatedly. It seemed he had guessed that I was starting to unravel the chaos he had left behind. As soon as I stepped through the door at home, I dropped my bag and, without wasting any time, headed straight for his room. My heart pounded heavily in my chest, as if it knew I was about to stumble upon something terrible. I walked over to his computer, turned it on, and began searching for any clues. The browser history pointed me in the right direction. The screen flashed with search results for luxury cruises for couples. I had no idea such trips even existed, though we had always discussed all significant plans in this house. I checked the destination. It was the very place he had mentioned for his so-called business trip. Suddenly, everything became crystal clear. There was no business trip at all. Trying to keep calm, I continued digging through his emails. And there, among countless messages, I found a booking confirmation made under the name Mario. Who was this woman? A wave of anger swept over me so fiercely that I nearly broke the keyboard. However, I composed myself, realizing I needed more evidence. The phone kept ringing, irritating me more and more, but I wasn't going to answer. Instead, I remembered the password for the system provided by the credit card company. Logging in, I began scrolling through the transaction history. With each new line, my shock only grew. There were so many charges that I hadn't made, and everything finally fell into place when I saw the purchase of an expensive designer handbag. It was the same handbag I had discovered earlier. Paul had used my card to buy a gift for his mistress and, moreover, had paid for her trip with him on this cruise. My rage reached its peak. Finally, I decided to answer the phone that had been ringing persistently. On the other end was my husband, complaining that his credit card wasn't working for some reason. I barely held back my anger as I told him that I knew he had borrowed my card for convenience on his business trip. My question about the cruise with his mistress made him falter. He tried to backtrack, but I wasn't going to let him. I kept pushing, listing all the details: the couple's cruise, the luxury vacation packages, the $50,000 spent, and all the payments made under N's name. Paul eventually went silent. It was as if he realized the gravity of the situation and finally admitted to the affair. His awkward apologies over the phone only fueled my irritation. He started begging me to reactivate the credit card so he could return home. His request seemed absurd to me, as if a simple apology could erase all the betrayal he had committed. I abruptly cut him off, suggesting he enjoy his time at the resort, essentially ending our relationship with that phone call. Ignoring his attempts to continue the conversation, I hung up. The calls kept coming, one after another, his persistence only deepening my frustration until I made up my mind. I blocked his number. Now, surrounded by silence, I tried to calm myself. But I knew one thing: his return flight was scheduled for noon in 3 days. This was clearly stated in the booking confirmation email he never wanted me to see. I had 3 days to act, and I knew that each of them would be crucial. Determined, I set about the process of moving my belongings out of our shared home, as if severing the final ties that connected me to the past. Each box, each item I packed, felt like a symbol of freedom from bonds that no longer held any meaning. The next day, feeling one step closer to freedom, I gathered all the necessary divorce documents and my husband's computer, which held undeniable evidence of his infidelity. With these in hand, I headed to his parents' house. The meeting with his parents was surprisingly calm, despite the tension. I spoke firmly but respectfully, explaining his betrayal and how his financial irresponsibility had placed me in a difficult situation. Their reaction was immediate. Anger and disappointment filled the room. Paul's parents, apologizing to me, immediately assured me they would help resolve everything as quickly as possible. They promised to expedite the divorce process and guaranteed generous alimony of $145,000, along with full reimbursement for the money their son had squandered. I was stunned by their swiftness and decisiveness. They were clearly as disappointed in him as I was. When the day of his supposed return arrived, I received a message from his parents. The divorce papers had already been processed. They also informed me that, aside from the illegal charges on my credit card, he hadn't been able to withdraw any additional funds. But what was even more surprising was that the other woman, the one I had learned about, flew into a rage when she found out about the entire fiasco. In a fit of anger, she changed her plans and flew off to Singapore, leaving him in a very difficult situation. Why she didn't take more drastic action, like confiscating his passport, remains a mystery, but one thing was clear: she no longer wanted anything to do with him. When Paul returned to Singapore, he was met with a harsh reality: an empty home and a disconnected phone number. Completely disoriented, he tried seeking comfort with his parents. However, there he was met with only a stern rebuke. They insisted he sign the divorce papers immediately, officially ending our life together. But his problems didn't end there. The woman now demanded he return the $50,000 she believed he owed her for the generosity she had shown him during their romance. He had no choice but to agree, knowing his lifestyle would now be severely restricted. Much of his future resembled that of a teenager under strict supervision, with a curfew and limited freedom. Armed with all this information from his parents, I decided to file a lawsuit against this woman for $7,000, seeking compensation for the suffering she had unintentionally caused me by being part of this humiliating and painful chapter. It was the final step in a long and difficult journey toward closing this turbulent chapter of my life. Now, I was ready to move forward, free from the deceit and betrayal that had held me captive for so long. The next day, I returned to work with a new sense of lightness. Many of my colleagues, both senior and junior, showed concern, asking, "Hey, are you okay? If you need to talk, I'm always here to listen." Their words touched me more deeply than they could imagine. I felt grateful to be working with such kind and understanding people. Thank you, I really appreciate it. Let's get together sometime for a drink. My treat. It'll be like a therapy session, I offered with a smile, to which they enthusiastically agreed. We met up, and over a glass of wine, I finally let go of the heavy memories, speaking about everything that had been bottled up inside. Each word I said felt like it was washing away the weight of the past. The evening passed in an atmosphere of support and understanding, and as I headed home, I was filled with a sense of hope. Only good things awaited me now, at least, that's what I told myself with a smile.